Welcome, everybody. And I want to say a special welcome because this is our first Ask the Author live video stream. And what could be more thrilling than to be having this conversation with Paulette Jiles? I am thrilled, absolutely thrilled. I'm such a fan. And we are in the thick of being in love with your book. News of the World which was our December book, was really one of the most popular book of all of the literary book clubs in 2020. And it's a book that I read a few years ago and I never stopped thinking about it. It's just a magnificent book. So thank you for the book, and a special thank you for making time today. I want to introduce you a little bit to the people listening in as somebody who has had a long career as a poet and a novelist. You are from Missouri and then spent a long time in Canada, as I understand it, and you're now in Texas. Can you talk a little bit about how you came to your career as a writer?
Oh, gee, that's huge.
Yeah.
That's huge. Well, I started out with poetry, and that taught me a lot about handling language. But at the same time, my poems just started getting longer and longer and longer. And so I decided to try to learn to write a novel. And that was very difficult. It was very hard because I was going against the conventions at the time, and now as well. I was going headlong against conventions and as to what women ought to write. So it took me a long time. Writing is expensive in terms that you're not paid by the hour to write. You must have long blocks of free time and some way to support yourself while you do that. And after you finish it all, well, then you've got to re-employ yourself somewhere or somehow. And this goes for poetry as well. So unless you're in academia was just not amenable to me. Most poets are in academia in some way, but because I'm not a good teacher and I couldn't handle the paperwork. My sister's a teacher in the family. That's what I tell people, and she's very good at it. I am not, and so that was my struggle: was to find long enough blocks of time, free time, to write novels that didn't work, because you have to learn by failing. And I threw away a lot, thousands of pages, before I learned what it was I wanted to do and how to do it. Oh, does that sum it all up?
Did you, while you're working on a novel, do you exclusively write the prose, or do you alternate working on poetry and working on a novel?
No, I don't write poetry anymore, but as I say, it taught me a lot. The basic unit of poetry is the phrase, and the basic unit of prose is the sentence. But within those sentences, you have phrases. And so I learned as a poet how to handle phrases and phrasing, and that carried over into my prose. It taught me a lot to handle those two types of units. And so, no, I don't write poetry anymore, except, we might call blocks of my writing in some books, technically poetry, because it's phrase based.
I think that's why I fell so deeply in love with the book. It was both the story, which is fascinating, but the opportunity to sink into some of the imagery and the language. And I read the book without knowing that you had a background as a poet. And when I learned it, it came as no surprise to me, because those sections of the book that float almost above the story and feel very immersive, and they're just beautiful. So one of the big issues, of course, is um, how then you find the subject of a book, which is, of course, poetry has subjects, but of course, the narrative is the big driver in a novel. So it's a
Yeah,
whole,
poetry is more about a meditation, a brief meditation on something that's very personal. It's sort of, it's almost always first person. Although I've read quite a few poems that are observations of life outside the window that are just fabulous, fabulous. But poetry has sort of wrote much of itself in parts of that book. But then I did have to learn how to handle narrative and storytelling. And for me, the story takes precedence over anything else. You 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 have, somebody wrote the difference between a stereotype and an archetype. And I forget what the definition was, but it's very clever. And of course, I can't remember it, but you're dealing, whether you like it or not, in any kind of storytelling, you're dealing with archetypes. You cannot avoid it. And the thing is to make them fresh and new and do surprising things in combination. I've often compared the movement of a plot, of a narrative, and the archetypes within it as a kaleidoscope. With a kaleidoscope, you've probably got 18 pieces in that sort of spyglass looking thing, 18 colored pieces, but the combinations are infinite, infinite. So you have to make those archetypes fresh and new and give them new directions or something unique that nobody's ever done before. Captain Kidd falls into the archetype of the Senex Eratus, grumpy old man, basically. And but wise at bottom. The child, of course, is the archetype of freshness and innocence, which has been used since Dickens' time and way before Dickens' time. Little Nell and little Dorrit, bringing something fresh and new, some new insight from her freshness. And what I like to do is combine opposites. Try to combine opposites.
Mhm.
And I did that with the old man and the little girl. And then you throw them into danger. And your danger has to be plausible. It can be improbable, but it must be plausible. So you throw them into different kinds of danger, interior as well as exterior. That helped.
Yeah, well, actually, an almost
This is a
perfect
lecture. I should be lecturing.
no, but it's a perfect description of the book, and I agree with you that obviously, people are archetypes. I mean, we all are, as well as being far more complicated than that. But we do.
Right.
I mean, we are each of us fall into certain identifiable categories of
And at different
personality.
periods of our life. Yeah.
Yeah. Did you grow up reading a lot of Westerns?
No, not particularly, but I had a great reader in my mom, and she used to read to us every night. And if she didn't have a book handy, she would tell us horror stories, which kept us awake all night because she was very good at it. Um, and some of them were so imaginative, and she swore they were true, and I know she made them up, but we knew she made them up, but that's okay. No, so that was my inspiration. And she used to read us poetry from the childcraft books. Some of the people in the book club may remember the old childcraft books with Parrot Don Nurkum Dowdee and all those, and the Watchers, and those wonderful poems that she would read to us, and inspired a love of language.
So tell me, and I know this is one of the first questions from Finch, who is in the book club, which is the very fundamental question, which is where did the idea for the narrative of News of the World come from?
Where did the idea come from?
Yes.
Well, one book for me, when I first learned to write a novel that worked, it was Enemy Women, and it just all kinds of lights went on in my head. And then one book began to fold into another. I was thinking I was writing a sequel to Enemy Women, and I would have Adair and the Major marry and go live in North Texas to get away from the recriminations and social mess that Missouri turned into, the Ozarks turned into after the Civil War. And as I was researching what would North Texas be like at that time, I came upon the story of Britt Johnson. And so I wrote the story of Britt Johnson, who's the only book that I have written about a real person. Britt Johnson was a real person. He was an African-American frontiersman whose children and wife were taken captive by the Kiowa. And he went alone into Indian Territory and got them back. It's the most amazing thing. And nobody recorded how he did it. They just said he did it. He went alone into Indian Territory with carrying his life in his hands. And I thought, okay, and this is a great love story too. And so in that book, I needed a point where Britt and his freighter's crewman, he was a freighter, he delivered freight, would hear about the I believe it's the 14th Amendment, which abolished slavery and allowed freemen to vote. And I need to get that information across the audience. At that time, I was speaking with some friends of mine, Wayne and June Chisholm, Wayne is from an old North Texas ranching family. And he told me his great-grandfather used to go around reading the news. Mm. I thought, wow, what a great idea. And there was a picture of him too. He had a picture of his great-grandfather who was white-headed and very distinguished looking. And so I had, and his name was Caesar Aloysius Kidd. So I changed the name to Jefferson Kyle Kidd. But I had him read the newspaper and read the news in order to convey to the audience that this had been passed for Texas, in order to Texas to rejoin the Union and get out from under Reconstruction. And Britt was in the audience in the back thinking about this. So that was just a little dramatic moment. But I thought, he's too good. Captain Kidd is too good he needs his own novel. So when I finished Color of Lightning, I began, and I dealt a lot with captives in Color of Lightning. I researched captives very, very thoroughly. And these are all real people who really were, and children who were really taken captive. Their names are real in Color of Lightning. But then I moved on. And one of those stories was a child named Bab, B-A-B-B. I forget her first name, but she had been taken and she was only with the Native people for a year and she didn't want to go home. And her grandfather came to get her and it took him, I don't know, at the Indian Agency at Fort Sill, Oklahoma, it took him a week to convince her to come home with him and being very kind and very gentle. And so fine, and I thought there's the story, and he took her home in a wagon. So I just combined Captain Kidd with that captive and made up that she's a fictional person and this Captain Kidd is fictional.
And to just follow up on Finch's other question, which is why you made Captain Kidd so elderly. But it sounds like the inspiration for the character was an older person.
Yeah. Yeah, okay. And it made a great combination too. He becomes a Senex Iratus, Senex Eiratus. It's a very old term. It was a stock character on stage in medieval times and before, going back to Roman times, I think. And a great combination with the young, fresh child who needs help, who needs guidance, and the supposedly crabby old man.
Mm-hmm. I also like the fact that we have such a long backstory for him that wouldn't have been possible if he were younger.
That's right.
It adds a lot of richness to who he is and what he's seen in the world.
Good point.
So the next question from Morgan Owl is why you chose not to use quotation marks.
Oh, I just fell in love with it. I saw Cormac McCarthy doing it. And I thought that is so freeing, and because it seemed like dialogue was held within these sort of barbed wire quotes. And also when I was a kid, I read way ahead of my age group. And a lot of the older British novels did not have quotation marks. They just had a dash indicating that this is dialogue. And I really like that. So I decided to try it. I tried it twice, but I think I don't think I'll keep doing it. I didn't do it in Simon the Fiddler, but it was fun. It gives it a more integrated feel. The speech and the action are more integrated with each other. There's not such a great set off, and it seems dreamier somehow.
It does seem, I feel like you move so seamlessly from narrative to quote back to narrative when there aren't I don't like them either. And I loved not having them. I loved the sensation of reading without them.
Yeah, yeah,
It was,
it's
I
fun.
loved it.
You just have to take extra care to be sure that people know who's speaking, and which means that you really should not combine a piece of dialogue with narrative. You have to set it off in another paragraph. You have to move down a paragraph.
Mhm,
Just have to just take a little extra care.
mhm. The next question from Elizabeth D is asking if you would talk about the theme of family as is explored in the book, namely what constitutes an authentic family versus blood relatives, which we obviously come to understand there's a great deal of difference. And being related by blood doesn't necessarily mean you feel love or kindness for each other.
Sure. Well, that goes back into prehistory. No, I'm not competent to answer that question. I'm just a writer. I'm not a sociologist. I'm not a psychologist. But all I can say is speak to my own experience, which I have 25 first cousins on my dad's side. And we are all so different. There's a huge age range as well. And some of them I get along with, and some of them I don't. But we still get together. We have cousin reunions. We still get together. So we avoid anything. We avoid anything we know people are going to fight about,
That's
including memories of our grandparents.
probably a very good policy. But to me, that was very central to the book, which is what is it that makes family? Is it choice? Is it fate? What is it? And I think that it becomes a really interesting part of the book.
Well, if you will notice that it's very brief, but when he first takes her back to be with the Leonbergers, he notices that the whole community comes out to celebrate this girl coming back, which is, of course, what they would do, and bringing food and celebrating and getting together and saying, oh, she's been rescued or whatever, she's been returned. But he notices that they all talk to one another and not to that couple, the Leonbergers. He notices that they are in a little frozen circle of their own because they're not very nice people, and people just don't want to be around them. But the rest of the relatives of the community are kind of circling around, and unfortunately, those are the very people she has to be returned to. So that says more about family than the old man and the little girl, which any human being with a heart would want to rescue that little girl and help her in any way we can, which he does. He's got a big heart. But that's just a little bit about family right
To let's see. A. Hunzik asks, what aspects of popular Western novels did you employ and what aspects did you avoid?
Well, the Western's always been a quest novel. It's been a novel of action. It's been a novel where the main protagonist usually is assertive and moves forward to come to grips with problems rather than avoiding or evading or becoming a victim or running or hiding, and uses his or her head to deal with what's coming at them. So that is the basic of the narrative of the Western. And I didn't read a lot of Westerns when I was a kid. I really did not. My brother and I read a lot of science fiction, and in some ways it's the same thing as moving to a sort of an imaginary landscape in which things occur, things leap out of from behind rocks at you. So I did read a lot of Westerns, but mainly from science fiction, the older science fiction, I did absorb that feeling of the West.
Mhm. Jamie Lee asks, that says that you and I both are known for thoroughly researching our work. Thank you. And what is your process when you're doing your research?
Sometimes I have to go back to original sources, and sometimes it's online. More and more things are online. It makes it far easier. But when I was researching enemy women, I had to go rooting through courthouses in southeastern Missouri, pulling out old drawers that were stuck with paint and using screwdrivers to get them open, and finding old records. And I was lucky enough to have a friend who had the complete copies of everything referring to Missouri in the official records of the War of the Rebellion. Now, that is a 117 volume work, and the original is in the National Archives in Washington, D.C. And she had been researching it, and she very kindly Xeroxed everything. She Xeroxed about 250 pages and sent them to me.
Wow.
So people help one another, researchers help one another. Um, so it's fun, and you just have to be really careful and check everything, absolutely everything, because
Well,
you never know. With Simon the Fiddler, for instance, um, a lot of the fiddle tunes that I thought were really old, when I would look them up on YouTube or whatever, and it would say, traditional fiddle tune, but then I look them up online, the YouTube, um, through various music history sites, and they were written in 1890. So I have to discard them. I'm looking for something around 1860, 1866 or before, the really old ones. So I had to be very careful about that. A lot of tunes I thought were coming from time out of mind happened to be written, recently. So, but it's fun to do. I got to listen to a lot of music.
that's great. And actually, the second question, or the next question, really is the essentially the same, from Sasa. How did you research the historical context? Guns, immigrant communities, property ownership. So you do work through archives, libraries, online material. And this is just
Well,
my addition to that question, which is I always thought one of the great advantages of writing fiction rather than nonfiction, which was what I write, is that you can make it up and you don't
make
have
it
to
up.
be right.
That's right. That's right. Well, researching guns is, my brother helps me. My brother helped me. He's passed away now, but uh, I don't particularly like guns, so I don't have a deep interest in researching them. But once in a while, you run into a lucky find. I take allergy shots once a week, and down the local clinic, and I was sitting outside waiting for my turn to go for allergy shots. Everybody shows up for their allergy shots on Tuesdays, and a lot of ladies bring their quilting, and they bring their embroidery, and they bring, they tell me their clothes. It's just a home week on it. But people contributed a lot of magazines for people to read. So I picked one up, and it was a catalog of an upcoming auction in Dallas, a beautifully done catalog. It was beautifully photographed on very heavy paper, very expensive, and the pieces were enormously expensive. But they had very rare weapons going back to like the 1820s, and I stole it. I took it home with me. And that's how I found the Dance and Company revolver that Simon has. It was something a little bit unusual. It was a Confederate copy of the five-shot Navy Colt. And you get to know them, and I've never fired one, but I know a lady who has, a Western woman writer who has fired them. But
So it's
anyway,
important to
so,
you
so
that the details are in fact accurate and true.
Say that again.
It sounds to me like you are completely committed to the details being accurate and that
Yes,
you're not
yes.
inventing them out of whole cloth.
Yes, and one thing you have to remember, going back to guns at that period, they did not have smokeless gunpowder. So one shot, it ended up with a big cloud of smoke. And if a whole bunch of guys were shooting, you ended up with a pall of smoke that you could hardly see through. And when I was watching the movie, News of the World movie, those guys were firing and they were shooting smokeless powder. And it was not authentic. It was not authentic. And because
Mm,
it really made a massive amount of smoke when that old black powder was fired. So
huh. Well,
anyway, and so when I'm writing scenes with somebody fires, I have to remember, that there was a lot of smoke and you were dodging your own smoke to get around to see where you were shooting.
I think you have the heart of a historian.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I hope historians are not insulted by that. So.
Yeah, well, absolutely not. The next question from Dean Butcher or Booker, pardon me if I'm mispronouncing, you've actually already answered, which is whether you were able to find any sources that informed the character of Johanna. But you said this girl, Bab, was the model.
Yes, and my husband and I spent a lot of time raising our two grandchildren. And my granddaughter, who's now grown up, and she is an attorney. But when she was little, she was like Johanna. She was blonde, red hair, and full of fire, and was always inventing something. And partially, I took a little bit of her character.
Mm. Philip asks if you can tell us a little more about children taken by Native American tribes.
That is a whole literature, and children who were taken by Native American tribes usually survived, and adults did not. Um, and having come through the trauma, probably of seeing their parents killed and their house set on fire, they were then adopted by Native American women, and very much loved and raised as. And so the relief of coming through that sort of baptism by fire into a new life, and Native American culture is very warm, very easy with children. They're not strict. Life is hard enough without adding any hardships and strictness from the parents. Very indulgent, and so I think that's a major reason that those kids fell so completely into the Native way of life. That memory of death, fire, and smoke behind them, and then to be treated very kindly with respect. That's probably why they did not return. Now, adults were a different matter. They were usually killed.
Mm.
These are warrior societies. You have to remember the Plains societies were warrior-dominated societies, as opposed to the Tewa and the Pueblo Indians, who were more agricultural. They had cities, but the Plains Indian were very much warrior societies.
This is actually the next question you've really answered. This is from Barbara D. Alba. Again, forgive my pronunciation, who says, I really enjoyed this novel. I was wondering why Johanna wanted to run back to the tribe early in the story. Wouldn't have she wanted to run back to her tribe rather than stay with the captain at the end of the story?
Right. Well, trying to go back, of course, to safety and love, which is what she knew for 6 years of being with Kyle. Although life was hard, there's no two ways about that. But by the time, but then she had bonded with the captain, and bonding often comes under intense stress and duress, which is the gunfight scene. And in that gunfight scene, they thoroughly bonded together. As together they fought off the bad guys. So that's why she stays in.
Mm-hmm. Carter says, when I told a friend I was reading this book, she had a negative reaction to the idea of a story about a girl captured by Native Americans, thinking it would perpetuate a stereotype of Native Americans as savages. After reading the book, I think you clearly avoided doing that. But what would you say to a reader who's wary of reading this particular type of story?
Go read it. Go buy the book.
Yeah. And I actually, I think it's a very legitimate question to raise, but I think it's answered by the book.
Good, good. Thank you.
Emma says, I haven't seen the film adaptation yet, but from the trailers, it seems like the perfect casting. What is it like seeing your story made into a film, and has it aligned with the vision you had while writing the novel?
Well, you know, it's moving into a visual medium from print. With the book, you can lay it down, walk away, come back later, think about it. Um, but with the movie, you are caught up on the movie's time. You're locked into the movie's progression and its time and the time that it takes, so that things just, you can get visual cues where in prose you would have to describe the visual cue. So it's just very different. So yes, there's quite a few changes in it. And then some things are the same, but you just hand the book over. When you sign on the dotted line, that's it. The director can do what he wants. I think he did a beautiful job. I think it was really gorgeous. It's cinematically, it's absolutely gorgeous. And of course, Tom Hanks is absolutely wonderful. And so, yes, there's changes, but it's a visual medium as opposed to.
I can't wait to see it. But I feel that a book is a book and a movie is a movie. And I agree with you. I think there's something important about not saying, well, they should be exactly the same. They're not exactly the same. They're completely different mediums. And
Yep. Yeah, they really are. Yeah.
Bug asks, now that your movie has been turned, I'm sorry, now that your book has been turned into a movie, did you have any say in it? Or did you turn over the right to make changes? I can probably.
Yeah, you do. You turn over the right to make changes. And now my agent just told me the other day that they have a very strong and very good offer on The Color of Lightning, which is the story of Britt Johnson, the African-American frontiersman. And but that I'm going to, I don't get script approval. Nobody gets script approval. It's just how it is. It's how life is with the literary world. You do not get script approval, but at least I get to see one of the first drafts in the script, because it's important, because he was a real person. Captain Kidd is a fictional person, Johanna is fictional, everybody in that is fictional, but with Britt Johnson, he was a real guy. So, and I want to remind them of that. So.
Yeah. Oh, that makes sense. It is different. Certainly. I mean, these are tricky issues because
They are.
the movie always has a disclaimer saying, while it may be based on real people, it's its own invention, but it's still important to feel that it's not in some way so completely at odds with the truth.
Well, yeah, with Color of Lightning, I was dealing with three different cultures: Native American culture, and the lives of African Americans on the frontier, free men on the frontier, and the culture of freighters, which are like truck drivers. And then the white culture is Samuel Hammond, who was from the East, and he was appointed as a Quaker to be the Indian agent in Fort Sill. And those three different cultures And I worked with Native American people for about 10 years, and I spoke an indigenous language. I spoke Ojibwe. I don't speak it anymore. It's very, very complicated, and you have to keep speaking it in order to keep current with it. And so working with those three different cultures is a very, very delicate balance. That's why I'm very nervous about this, and I want to be sure that you have to be neutral and objective, and yet at the same time sort of caring about all three. And that balance is very, very delicate. So I'm anxious about it.
I can't wait. I am going to ask our final question, which
Okay.
is why do you, this is from Amy Kirkman, why do you think News of the World was particularly popular? What do you think made it click?
The characters, that combination of the old and the young, going into danger and coming out the other side of danger and having bonded. It was a plot that just wrote itself almost. So maybe that's it. You you know you spend a lot of time with your characters when you're writing, and I don't like to spend time with people I don't like. And and I like Captain Kidd and I like Johanna, and the villain is just villainous because I don't spend a lot of time analyzing villains or their psychology. Just like to spend time with people I enjoy being with, who are assertive and clever and imaginative and can meet difficult circumstances and take us on a journey through danger and come out at the end. So
Well, I truly love this book, and I want
thank
to thank
you.
you again for creating this. It's really it's a very, very special piece of art and such a pleasure to have read it. I
Very
want to thank
kind.
you for your time here today. This is so wonderful. The I don't know
Thank
if
you
you
for being such a supporter of books. You're a great enthusiast for the written page, and I really love that. We need it. We need people like you.
well, it's really it's a joy. I mean, I was thinking about it today and just thinking about the club and how enthusiastically people have been engaged and how it's just certainly during COVID, the idea that you can travel to the 1800s in Missouri by reading a book is a particularly valuable fact about literature. So it's just, and it's really been fun sharing it with this group. Did you have a website or an upcoming book or anything that you would like to mention that we include in the interview?
I was keeping up a blog, a website, and but the WordPress changed its whole configuration, and it just I thought I don't have time to spend day after day trying to figure this out because or call my IT guy to come in, and then in this little town I'm going to have to wait for him for 2 or 3 days. But I said I'm just quitting, so I quit my blog, and no, I don't have any social media.
Oh, okay. Well, fair enough. You
But
give
thank
us
you for asking.
your books are enough. I want to thank everyone who's part of my book club and
Yes.
anyone else who joined us today for being part of this. We're in the middle of reading another fabulous book, 10 minutes, 38 seconds in this strange world. But anybody who hasn't read News of the World because they joined us late, please do. You will thank me for urging you to read this book because it's just fantastic. Please join us on the app and keep the conversation going. Paulette, thank you so much. This was
Thank
a
you,
real
Susan.
honor.
Yes, it was
So
an honor
great
for me
to
as well.
meet you.